My name is Robin Deacon. I'm an artist, filmmaker, writer, and educator based in America. I live in Chicago, but I spent really most of my life living in the UK.
Okay, and you are a fine art graduate from 1996, is that correct?
That's right. So I studied from 1993 to 1996 at the University of Wales Institute in Cardiff.
And could you tell us about your art education? You can go back as far as you like and just kind of give us an idea of what happened to you on that journey of education.
Okay. Well, I kind of feel like maybe I shouldn't go too far back because then it becomes like, oh, at school I did art and I loved art, and it wasn't always like that. I kind of felt like the kind of key tipping point for me was when it came to my A levels, when I had to sort of make these choices as to where I was going to go, and setting up the possibility that I might go to university and what kind of things I'd like to study. And I do remember the way that art was taught at GCSE level in school was very much along the lines of, kind of drawing still lives and stuff like that. So, and I was really terrible at that. I could never draw. So I had all of, yeah, and I was rubbish at that. And I used to have lots of ideas, and I used to want to do sort of things that kind of went off the map a little bit, or off the beaten track of what I was being told to do. And I had some really nice art teachers, but I think overall they were like, yeah, you have to learn how to draw. If you want to go to art school, you have to learn how to draw if you want to be an artist. So by the time I did my GCSE in art, and then by the time I got to my A levels, I had this choice because I was also pretty good. I was good at English and writing and stuff like that. So I had to have this choice of the way that the school had structured the timetable was like, it was kind of like you had to make these choices between doing art or doing, I think it was history. It was art or history. I had to do one or the other. And I ended up doing history. And so, but by the time I got to doing my A-levels, I ended up doing something that I really liked and thought, oh yeah, this is going to be useful. But ultimately I had a really terrible time with my A-levels, and I all along felt like I've done the wrong thing here. And I came out with terrible A-levels. I always sort of say this to students that I've had in the past, that your A-levels are, they are important, but sometimes it's not the end of the world if you don't get what you want. But I remember having a conversation with my mother, and I would kind of admitted to her, look, I'm having a really terrible time. I'm not really enjoying, and I really regret not having taken art. And like a lot of parents, my mother has been really supportive of what I've done as an artist without necessarily understanding what I do. But she was really wonderful in that she did all of this research for me and came back and said, oh, there's this thing you can do called an art foundation course. And it's like, okay. And she looked into it, and I thought, well, okay, well that's maybe a thing we could do. But then my worry then was, because I didn't do an art A level, would I be able to do the art foundation course? But then what I'd found I'd been doing was I'd still been doing little drawings and making little things all the time. So I still had kind of like, I guess what you might describe as a portfolio, but it wasn't the kind of portfolio I'd produced within for an art A level. So I went and did that. They interviewed me, and I think originally they'd wanted me to do a longer version of the course. I think they wanted me to do wanted me to do it for 2 years rather than 1 year, because I didn't have an art A level. But then when they made me the offer, they'll just do the 1 year art foundation, and that's where everything kind of started to click into place for me. And then going from that to the degree it was all a natural progression. It sort of felt like once I was in the art foundation course, and I really had some really wonderful teachers on that course, everything kind of the pathway kind of was clear in terms of the journey you go on from there.
So you saw it as quite a linear path towards being an artist.
It felt that way, yeah.
Okay.
And it felt that way. And you know, I suppose, but again, at that stage, I don't know. You know, sometimes I think these questions about professional practice or the idea of how one becomes an artist in terms of a job or a career or a way of living, sometimes those things kind of there's a danger that they come too soon in a conversation for an artist, and sometimes it's really nice just what the foundation course is really good. We didn't really talk about that, but we just tried stuff out.
What I'm kind of hearing is that it can make all the difference having a really good supportive family, and having that opportunity, because your mum kind of found out the direct path to becoming an artist for you, and you know, and obviously you had more to do with that, but the fact that she kind of did that research for you was careers advice, really.
Well, yeah, and like, you know, the interesting thing with my mum was, I mean, she used to be a singer in her youth and a toured around America, and my father also was a music teacher.
So they had certain empathy with you for being a creative person.
Yeah, definitely.
So then you went to Cardiff, and did you choose that course because it had the kind of time-based element to it specifically?
Oh, it was so funny, because I remember a big part of the foundation course was people being asked to make, you know, these kind of choices between institutions, so the first, second, third choice. And I can't remember if Cardiff was not my first choice.
Oh wow!
On
Surprises
paper.
me.
It's strange. It wasn't my first choice until I got there.
Oh, okay.
And that was the really big thing, because you had I had this idea of particular places, all kind of a bit in theory, of like, you know, places that have like supposed reputations, or, you know, or this sense of particular places having a particular kind of house style that you would maybe have to conform with. So a lot of those decisions were about, you know, what was your first, second, third choice, were kind of made on quite, you know, inaccurate, you know, preconceived.
You don't have much to go off, do you? I mean, it's a pre-internet kind of era where we couldn't look at photos and videos and...
Oh, totally. So remember, you know, I just got on the train and went to places. And that was kind of, and in doing that, I think Brighton or Goldsmiths might have been a first choice or something. I can't remember, but I remember going to Brighton, not really liking it, or not really feeling like, looking around the school, it all seemed like they weren't really that interested. But I remember going to Cardiff, and one of the students there showing me around the place and talking me through how the place works. I've never been to Cardiff before, let alone Wales. You know, I know someone who studied there after me had described going to Cardiff as a cheap way of studying abroad, which I always thought was kind of funny. You know, it was just this idea of kind of like being Cardiff. I thought was quite strange and quite exotic in a weird kind of way.
Ed Gray was saying that this morning, that the town itself at that time, it's not like that at all. I've been back since now, but at the time he had nothing to offer you know, those people in that art college, a massively condensed small population of very, very creative, unique, idiosyncratic people bursting with ideas. What were they doing in that place?
It's very odd when you think about it inside. But I mean, I've been back to Cardiff since. It's changed a lot. But you know, just there was something about, you know, in terms of thinking about the original question, like what level of choice was there? It was like this embodied choice. It was a thing of, I'm going to go and see what this is, and that was where the best decisions are made, I think, because every university has a prospectus, which is, you know, trying to sell you something, obviously. But
so,
I
Robin,
think
did you do postgrad as well?
I did, yeah.
Well, where did you do that?
That's not such a happy story.
Gosh.
I did it at the Central School of Speech and Drama. I did an M, and it wasn't very good. It kind of was difficult because the person who ran the course kind of left, like just before, and she'd been running it for many years, and she left, and when we got there was essentially nobody running the course. and the school, what it is to be an artist and what it is to teach. I think the experience I had there, I think really fed into my approach to teaching, and knowing that, that it really is important to kind of do right by the students, and to sort of, that experience I had was really kind of, I learned a lot from it, even though it was a horrendous experience.
I think also what's been coming out of these talks is that maybe the 70s, 80s, 90s ethos of teaching and education in HE was much less accountable than it is nowadays. So they could get.
It's that's an interesting question, and just sort of thinking about, particularly being Cardiff as the point of reference of kind of a certain strain of craziness that went on there, and I couldn't imagine. And I mean, teaching in America, in and of itself is very different, because you're conscious of this is a much more kind of libelous kind of culture, and there's a lot of stuff about liability and stuff that we have to deal with. We have to deal with here. That it's more, you can work through it. You can kind of get through to the other side of it, but it's just another layer of discussions that you have to have.
That's interesting. I mean, do you feel that what happened on our course would not be possible to happen nowadays?
I think there were certain things that they would struggle with here. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, probably here too. Okay, I'm going to kind of move on to so after your MA, what did you do? Did you have to do any kind of jobs that Johnny Briggs said he washed up, Ed Gray said he moved furniture. Did you do anything straight after? I
stacked boxes. I stacked boxes in a warehouse, and the trick I learnt there was, because at the time I was quite a night owl. I used to like staying up late. That if you did the really weird late shifts, you'd get paid more. You'd get, it was like, I mean, it's probably not like that now again, but there was something about, if I worked from like 10 at night till 2 in the morning for these late deliveries coming in, and it was just a warehouse that was for, I don't know, it was for the Burton Group or something, I don't know. I moved back home to my parents for a few years, for a couple of years, and worked in these warehouses stacking boxes, paid for a few of my debts because the pay was pretty good, and then I did a bit of volunteering at a local art gallery, which was really good, which was really useful and really key, because the woman who I worked with there, who was running that gallery, wrote me a reference for the Tate Gallery, which I worked for later on, and that was just kind of like, I mean, I got in trouble in terms of doing that volunteering because I was signing on and they thought I was working and they wanted to withdraw my benefit, and I said, but I'm doing volunteer work, I'm not being paid for it, and it's really good for my career and so on, but they didn't seem that interested in that. But I did these bad jobs. I did these sort of these jobs that in some ways were kind of useful. Before I moved to London to do my masters, I was also working in the women's wear department at Debenhams, which I ended up referring to in later artworks, performance pieces that I did.
I've had this exact conversation with another artist. I'll ask you the same question. Do you feel that these experiences were fundamental to your development as an artistic kind of person?
You see, I'm wary of the question because I remember I have to keep reminding myself that at the time it was terrible. I hated it. It was really difficult. And then, but then on the flip side of it, I realised that, okay, well, it made me feel like, okay, I've got to work for something. This sounds terribly like I'm sounding like a parent someone's parents talking about, character building or something. But there was kind of...
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is just that.
Yeah. There was something about it that kind of, I think, was a good thing for me to experience, like, blue collar work, of doing work that I didn't want to sit there saying, this is beneath me because I have a degree. I mean, it's nonsense,
Yeah, I mean, I think Andre Stitt when he used to do guest lectures or whatever when we were at University Cardiff. He used to be a hod carrier.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and it's funny, like the amount of artists who who have done stuff like this, who have worked in fields. There's been a lot of stuff on the radio the last few days about the composer Philip Glass, who was like a taxi driver into his 40s.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of like a kind of form of work that is kind of that you feel like that your work needn't contradict what you do as an artist. It needn't, and in some ways, one of the conclusions that this is something that I was talking about with some of my students in last week, was there's an argument for saying that if you are relying on your artwork to make money, to live, then sometimes that can potentially push you into a corner in that you can't say no, because this is my job and I need money to. And whereas if you have another source of income, and there's maybe a situation where you're being offered some sort of display of your work which you don't feel ready to show your work, or you don't feel like the situation really suits you ethically or whatever else, that you can say no, that you're in a position to say no to things. And I feel like as a young artist you want to always say yes, you really want to say yes, but as an older artist you kind of feel like, I just want to sometimes have that opportunity to say no and not feel that I won't be able to pay my rent the next week,
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point that you're making, and I suppose being an educator, kind of having that dual kind of existence that is, with the common theme is art, it allows you for a bit of leeway financially, I suppose. So in terms of networking and exhibiting, which is it's a funny word to use with you and your type of work because you're a live artist, how did things start to happen after your postgraduate?
Well, there were I don't know. I'm trying to work out how, because it's funny, as a person, I'm not really. I mean, I'll network if I kind of have to, but I'm not necessarily one of those people who will be kind of like going up to people and saying, "Hey, I'm great, show my work." But there were.
What about? Did you apply for lots of funding or? Well,
there were several things. I mean, there was, for example, one of the first pieces of funding I got was from an organisation called Arts Admin, who are based in London, and they sort of specialise in sort of experimental performance and theatre practitioners, and they had this sort of emerging artists fund, which I applied for twice. I didn't get it the first time, and that's maybe one thing. In terms of placing this in the realm of advice, is sort of that idea of not giving up on something, because if the first time you get rejected, then in a sense you're on their radar, you're on someone's radar, and I kind of feel like that's really, really good. And then the second time round I got it, and that just allowed me to start dealing with issues that were building up around my work, because when you're in school, when you're in university, you have this network of support. You have people who are going to show your work to and feedback on your work. When you're out there, you don't really have that. You don't have that anymore. So that was really good to have some sort of dialogue with somebody. They had this really great artist advisor who you could meet with and talk to about your work and about this thing of how to get more work. And it wasn't about work in terms of as in, I need money to survive. It was like this idea of how do I develop as an artist. I mean, what was nice about about them and this other organisation I got funding from later on, called the Live Art Development Agency, was you never felt with them that they were asking you to present them with a finished product, like a thing, like to prove that you had done what you said you were going to do. They both seem to be interested in ideas of like process and kind of like working through what you're doing without some sort of time frame on it. And then in terms of the conclusions that I drew from getting the funding support from them, like the culmination of that came much kind of later on. It fed into my work in a really kind of subtle way, and then I think like 5 or 6 years later, it was like, oh my god, yeah, the reason I've got to this point is because of that funding or that support that they gave me. So, and then through that, the performance, in terms of the more general points about networking, aside from ideas of funding, was what is good about performance, and sometimes bad, is that you do have a sense of a network that you can kind of get a sense of, because it's quite small and so many people do it. So
and people get together all at the same time to see something. So it's much more social than much more social than a private view, for example.
Oh, totally, yeah. And I think there's a kind of intimacy, I think with it as well, because if you're displaying paintings or sculptural objects, you don't necessarily need to be there for that. But if I'm doing a performance, I need to be there to do it. So I think you get that immediacy, that kind of directness, and so it was kind of essentially a snowballing effect. You would go to a festival, and in the audience there would be someone else who ran a festival or a venue who would be interested in your work and ask you to show your work later on, if not a year or so down the line. So initially, when you were starting out, there was an element of risk, and sometimes I remember getting on this is when I was still living with my parents. I remember getting on a train going to London when I still lived with my parents, and sort of feeling like no one's paying for me to get on the train. And it was some event in a club. It was like, oh, you got a 10-minute performance in a nightclub somewhere in East London, and it was like, oh, okay, and they'll buy me a pint or something, and and it was like, and I remember there was this idea of kind of like, I'm paying for this, but it was, at that time, it was such a pleasure to do it, and it was like an adventure, and you would have, and I'd meet people, and it wasn't so much about, I need to be paid, I need to make a profit, or at least not make a loss on this. It was just the experience of doing it, which overrode anything to do with like money at that time anyway.
So at what point did you start thinking, this is my profession, this is my job, and can you also make the link into you working in education as well?
Oh sure, yeah. I think maybe one of the organisations I mentioned before was the Live Art Development Agency, and they had this a thing called the One-to-One Artist Bursary, which at the time they were doing it actually enabled me to stop working in my job for about a year. And again, this is when rent in London was quite cheap, so you could kind of do that. But at that time I'd been working at the Tate. At the Tate Modern in London as an information assistant, which I think maybe that was also useful for starting thinking about what it would be to work within education. So before I left there to sort of before I was able to leave there with this bursary that I was given, I'd been doing the odd kind of artist, kind of like guided tours in the gallery, and kind of quite enjoyed that, and kind of trying to find where performance and video artists were in the gallery and doing little talks about them. I really enjoyed doing that. I also had a friend, an artist friend I knew, who was teaching at Nottingham Trent University, who he'd advertised for guest artists, and so I said, and I got in touch with him and said, yeah, I could come and do a talk and a little workshop, and I just started building on these little networks of friends who were already within institutions. And initially it was just this idea of going up and doing a one-off talk, and you go up for a day, and again, like going to London on the train for nothing, it was like, it's exciting, and I get to meet people and feel like I'm teaching and put something on my resume. And so that was how that started. It was like doing one-off artists' visits, and then that built up. Once I built that up, I kind of started being asked to do classes. So there was, I remember teaching at Brunel over a term, these MA students, and it was kind of like that felt really different as well. Like, I felt more invested. And all this was functioning parallel to me making art and feeling like what that bursary from the Live Art Development Agency enabled was for me to continue creating work, and not to kind of dry up. And then eventually, I think I'd got to the end of doing that bursary, and I was thinking, the money had run out, and it's like, what do I do now? And like, the teaching wasn't really paying me enough to live. And then it was probably around 2004. I started a full part-time teaching job at London South Bank University on a new course, a drama and performance studies course, which I think was quite strange for me because my background wasn't really in drama, like theatre stuff. So what was really lovely about working there was I kind of, because it was all new, I was able to kind of plant my flag, if you like, and say, okay, I'm going to try.
This is where we're coming from.
Yeah,
and not about Shakespeare. What a joy that must have been.
That's not my thing, but I show you this other way of performing. And so I ended up being there for like nearly, I think it was 8 years in the end. Gosh. And I set up the course, helped set up the course. We started with a tiny amount of students, and I think by the time I left, it was about, I think we'd started with 6 students, and by the time I left it was about 70 or something like that across the 3 years.
And it was an undergrad?
It was an undergrad course, and and it was quite a big thing in terms of, there was maybe more of attention in terms of thinking about, what I'm doing as an artist, because it became like, this proper job that actually to have a lot more responsibility than I was used to, and I was fine.
Was that a shock? Was the becoming part of the system of full-time worker, I know in a very interesting job, a very rewarding job, but still on that treadmill of full-time work in education, was that a shock?
Totally. I mean, it was step by step, it was this incremental shock of like, oh god, they're asking me to do that, they want me to do like a budget for something, and they want me to like,
let's go to meetings.
And go to meetings with people and who are older than me. It's kind of like,
you do. I mean, it is the shock, isn't it? That you can be. I think everyone must do this. Like when I'm giving this talk, I'll probably be standing in front of people and thinking, how did this happen? How did I become the person who knows stuff?
And it's really it is really
it's
funny.
Very odd.
But then having spent 8 years there and sort of felt like I had helped build this course up, I kind of felt like I had maybe taken it as far as I could, and then I was looking at working in other kind of, in a way, I wanted to kind of return to teaching in an art school context, because I'd always enjoyed my experience of teaching in art schools, because I'd done guest stuff at Central St Martin's and places like that, and always really enjoyed that aspect of it. And so this job came up in the US at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, which is like, I think it's one of the major art schools in the US, and again because of the uniqueness of performance and, the degree to which people teach performance relative to people who are still working as performance artists. It seemed like the department that they had established there was kind of was a really good fit for what I'd already established at London South Bank, but it didn't have all the kind of theatre and drama stuff that I was always kind of fighting against a bit. So it was already coming into this sort of sympathetic kind of context. And originally I'd applied there, again, this thing about making sure that you don't give up on things, I'd applied there once, and they didn't turn me down, but they'd asked me to kind of talk on the phone for an initial interview. But around that time I was also offered this promotion at London South Bank, which I'd already said yes to, and I felt like, I can't really let them down. So I kind of said, look, I'll leave the interview, maybe we'll see what happens. And then when the job, another job in the same department came up a couple of years later, I applied again, and of course they remembered me and they'd spoken to me, and then they flew me out and let me. It was wonderful. It was great.
Very exciting. And can I ask you, what is the biggest challenge in your unusual occupation of being a fine artist in a very niche area of fine art, and being an educator? Just, you're not one against the other, but what is the biggest challenge you have in terms of the career you've chosen and the way you've chosen to live your life?
Well, I've been lucky, I have been lucky, and I kind of feel like I talk to friends of mine who made decisions about their careers really early on and kind of got locked into something really super early on in their lives, who kind of regret that now, or kind of feel like, they're maybe in a real sense of absolute sort of financial security, but then they kind of feel like, bored, or there's nothing to fight for, or hang on a second, they're either bored or there's nothing to fight for, or they just sort of feel like they made decisions too early. And so I kind of feel like in terms of this idea of challenge, I've been lucky. Those friends that I talk to who aren't necessarily that happy in their work, I kind of feel like when they hear me talking about things that I may be grappling with in my life, I think they're sometimes quite unsympathetic, in the sense that I'm working within an education institution that essentially is closed for like nearly 3 months a year, example. So I kind of feel like the work pattern that you get within education is very forgiving, and allows a lot. And the one thing that's interesting about working at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago is that on my contract it says, one of the terms of the terms and conditions of my contract is I have to maintain an artistic practice. I have to be an artist. So they hold me to that, and I hold them to that.
I think that's really kind of a quality between the arts and the science, really, because any other professorship or whatever in any other discipline, you would be expected to conduct research. So why should art not be the same?
The one thing, maybe going back to that notion of challenge, maybe one challenge that we maybe talked a little bit about earlier on was, maybe there were things I've been thinking about more about bureaucracy and about certain kinds of, maybe kind of changes in terms of how you deal with institutions. I think institutions can be kind of tricky to negotiate, and I'm kind of quite conscious of that being sometimes quite hard.
Yeah, I suppose. Do you find it challenging that we live in a less, the zeitgeist is that we live in a more kind of more conformist world, and like you said, our time at art college was without a rule book, and obviously there are lots of rule books now, although there are lots of opportunities with technology as well. So is technology a challenge?
Technology, well, I do sort of find like when I'm dealing with students, sometimes because I still have a really old like flip phone and they're there with their kind of like really swanky phones, I don't know what they're talking about.
I like that. You know they view you as eccentric because you've got...
I think they do. I think they do. I've become that nutty professor sort of thing. But there's kind of there's something about there's something about certain kinds of bureaucracy and institutional stuff that you kind of feel like you're insulated from it to a certain degree. But I'm about to become chair of my department in the school, and everyone's already sort of and when you're doing that, you end up teaching less. So I'm already sort of conscious of kind of like, if I'm stepping out of the classroom, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm just going to get kind of like absorbed by the bureaucracy and the institutional politics? But then at the same time, I kind of feel like there's ways of affecting change and making things better for the students, which aren't necessarily
another opportunity. What is your advice to final year fine art students in 2015?
Well, the first thing I'd say is kind of like, well, good that you made the decision to take fine art, because I do sort of feel like this idea of art, art as something to be taught, art as something that to be learned at university level is kind of under attack. It's the idea of these things are kind of being stripped out, and I think a lot of people view it as a risk. A lot of people view it as a problem, At the same time, I kind of feel like one thing I'd say is a lot of the skills that you learn in art school are very transferable, and it's not just about becoming an art, and it's not even just about thinking about what you're doing in terms of what you're going to do as a job. It's also about how going through an art school system can change the way you think about things and the way you function on a day-to-day basis. So it's not just like how you deal with what you do as a job. It's how you deal with the world. It's how you bring up your kids. It's how you it's how you deal with creativity in an everyday sort of sense. That I think there's something about certainly I'm sure it's different now, but the experience of going through the art school system in the UK at the time that I did, I thought was really profound in terms of what it did for me, and kind of uncoupling that from it as how it's going to affect or enable or not enable you to find the job that you want. Going back to what I'd said before, like your job doesn't necessarily have to be being an artist or even necessarily arts related, and I think in some ways if it isn't, that might enable you to be an artist in much more on your own terms than if you were kind of worrying about, well, I have to do X amount of paintings this week because I got to sell the damn things, and so it's
I think that's a brilliant piece of advice actually. I also think it's very nourishing for the brain to be given that 3 years, and you probably agree that when you go into a real job, whatever that is, and people say things like, well, let's think outside the box, that was a real shock to me because I didn't know there was a box. And I was too busy making all these boxes, different boxes. I didn't know there was a box, and it still shocks me now that is a term that's used. I think it's that's why I agree it's really important to keep fine art courses going, because I worry that I always find it really annoying when there are people who it's not just about people not really understanding what arts education is, or if there's a kind of sneering about, these are soft subjects, or these are subjects that aren't important, and they really are important, and they're viewed as the least vocational course, and on paper that it is, but if more funding and support is put into it, then you've made it a realistic career for yourself. I've been speaking to people all week who have made it a realistic career for themselves. It is possible.
Oh, it totally is, and I think a lot of that's just to do with, elements of it are to do with luck, elements of it are to do with you know, I've had moments of financial instability, but then at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, I've managed to avoid debt in a lot of cases as well. Like, I never really had like a credit card. I think I kind of get that from my dad. He's like, don't be in debt. He was always going on about that. But I think these things are kind of useful, that you don't want to feel like you owe people things. I think that's more of a general thing around life. I don't want to feel like I owe people something, and then again feel like in doing that you're in some kind of position of compromise. And again, I kind of feel like, yeah, the image of the university as not being something that's just some 3 years you'll spend preparing for a job. I mean, I think it's more than that, and particularly with arts courses, it's kind of, there's a lot of skills that you can get from doing that, which are more to do with more general skills around life, how you live, how we live, and I think it's important to remember that. But you know, I know people need work, people need to work, and people need money, and people need to live, and so on. So it's all very well me saying all of this stuff, because I know it's
well, you know, but you've travelled that road, and that's the whole point of these kind of life case studies, to speak to people who have travelled that road. Robin Deacon, thank you very much for speaking to me today.
My pleasure.